Okay, and we're live.
Awesome.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with me on this little thing that I like to do occasionally. This is Jeremy Sweeney, fellow DM and serviceman in our, let's see. Trying to think. I completely screwed that up.
Army National Guard.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for your service, man. Thank you. Truly.
No problem.
I guess I'll kick things off here. When did you get started in D&D?
Oh, that wonderful question there. My story is pretty much a lot of similar to what we would witness. A lot of different people at our age at this point. Always starts with school, seems to be the case. So I started getting into D&D probably around early to mid high school. At that point, I had a group of friends that loved playing board games, and they were awesome after school every day. We would come and play these crazy different types of board games. Anything from Go to Risk, Axis and Allies, Catan, name it. But eventually, somewhere along the line, D&D ended up being brought up by one of them. They wanted to kind of run a campaign with one of our little small friend groups, and we were going to take it from there. So for me, I was like, I didn't really understand what it was, but I've always been playing games all throughout my life, RPGs. I'm super into it. What RPG lover doesn't like Skyrim or your Witcher series?
That's true, man. Such a great series and such a good place to draw inspiration from.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I dived into D&D there, and the only problem that we ever really encountered is that each one of these individuals, there was like a pair of brothers, an older one and little one, is that they didn't really sit well with DMing a whole lot. So they would do like 3 or 4 sessions. I'm super excited, thrilled into the story, and then they would kind of be like, "Man, I'm wore out." Yeah. So the DM would swap to the next person, and they'd be like, they would do it for 3 or 4, and then they wore out. Well, after a few years of doing that, and I'm like, man, I can't take these short little 3 or 4 just cliffhanger sessions and then just starting anew every single time. So that's where I kind of decide to step in and be like, look, guys, I know I probably don't know about this, this game or this format as much as you all, but if I can take the torch and give it a whirl, and with my drive of wanting to stay consistent with it, that's kind of where I stepped into the seat of DM, and now I'm known as the forever DM. I've been doing it for years. So,
man, that's awesome. And that's literally a common occurrence that I've had on here interviewing several people. It's just that the people who do eventually become DMs and stick with it have always had like an inconsistency with people who are wanting to run games and things like that. But to me, I've been on both sides. For me, at this point in this juncture of my playing and stuff, I think I prefer to be a DM. Truth be told, like it is literally, you get to create the story, you get to place the characters, you get to play anything that you can possibly imagine, and bring that to life. And I think that if more people were more open to the idea of perhaps hosting a game, for some it might be even, I don't know where to start, or I'm not sure how good I am, about talking in front of people, or if you're nervous about bringing forth your own ideas to share at the table, especially with a close group of friends or something like that, because just as well as I do, your friends are usually the most brutally honest people that you can come across.
Oh, absolutely. Going through your peers can be a challenge within itself. So.
It can. Do you got any books or anything like that? Did you? Is there anything on the horizon that you're really looking forward to as far as new content coming out?
Yeah. So, I have to jump back a sec. When I DM'd for a while, I went off. Some of those pre-built. What do you call them?
Like modules and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I had originally, as a kid, I read in the Forgotten Realms series, Wheel of Time, stuff like that.
Okay.
So I had a lot of that Forgotten Realms lore, like, engraved into my soul. Like, I love the Drizzt series, and then, like, Salvatore's other little off branches there. They're all really good stuff. So I had a lot of content. So I didn't take too much. It wasn't too difficult for me to find a story and put it out. What eventually happened is, as we upgrade from Pathfinder, like old Pathfinder, up into 5e when it first was announced, a little complications came in there, but at the same time, Wizards of the Coast content was always Forgotten Realms based, or at least always had that branch of it. There's other branches as well, but so that kind of allowed me to take that content and expand it a little bit. So before I got 110% into my homebrew stuff, my similar phone group, it kind of drifted a little bit into newer friends. The old friends kind of moved away, as tragic story goes, away leaving from high school, going into college. We ended up with a new friend group. They were super into Critical Role. That's kind of where I started jumping into. I love the cast. I've watched them since their first campaign. They bring into that little Forgotten Realms, very similar stories in there, and I absolutely loved it. So when it was time for me to leave behind my very first campaign book that I set off, which was Out of the Abyss, I just love the whole Demons and Angels War stuff, man.
Yeah.
I eat it up.
Very compelling story too. I've been wanting to delve into it myself, but I've got too many things going on.
That tends to be the case.
Yeah.
So I had a friends group that loved the Critical Role lore, Wild Mount and etc. of that expansion, and then me, who's very familiar with Forgotten Realms, but not so familiar in DMing that type of lore. So there was a clash of lore there. And that's where my homebrew kind of came up, and I decided to make essentially more or less a planet that consists of those two realms together. So you have the Sword Coast, that's going to be on like your right side of the planet, and then you have Wild Mount and all the Matt Mercer's contents on the left side, and then my little homebrew continents and islands that are in between. So we started my first expansion into what I called and made the Grey Rifts, which is like a smaller continent of two giant sized, or not giant, but they're smaller in relation to the other stuff, but they're two continents, smaller continents that are an influx of both of those cultures that kind of mix together. And it's a little hard to do because deities and stuff gets a little complicated, but
yeah, I can imagine.
But I've been running that for probably about 4 years now, running the Grey Rift campaigns. Some ended, some other friend branches it ended, campaigns tend to die when you like to spread it to everyone but I've had the same consistent group for 6-7 years now, 4 years using the homebrew continent. They left Faerun, Sword Coast, and came into my little world, and we've been running that for a while, so.
Nice, man. And the consistency really helps as far as building the story and the world building. It really helps to have a core group, some people who are really dedicated to it, to really see those thoughts and ideas come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so
I agree.
How? What was your process to kind of creating your own homebrew? Did you? I don't know. I guess a method to the madness, so to speak. How did you get started on that?
So when I talk to people that want to DM, and a lot of members of that friend group have actually wanted to kind of start their own little DMing process. I always kind of give the same recommendation that helped me. Of course, everyone's different, so let it be as it is. But I always say that you could take a seed that was built or a wheel that was built by someone else, and you can kind of take that idea and expand on it with your own ideas. So to a brand new DM, I would always be like, you can, start off one of the core rule books. Don't get too bogged down, and because it's a lot of information on once. But then you could do what I did with the Out of Abyss campaign, is kind of start with that foundation, but then expand upon your own ideas. And so that's how I got to the Grey Rifts, was taking the Wild Mount content, taking the Faerun content, and expanding it into my own idea and all the stories I've read and such, and bringing them into a dark, stormy coast of the Grey Rifts. So
yeah. It's awesome, man. It's great. So how do you go about planning for a particular session?
So, some people put a lot of time and effort into preparing for a session. Some people not so much. It just depends on the type of person. Me, I'm kind of a mix of both. So I like to jot down ideas when I'm working or anything and I'm bored. And I'll type them into a notepad on my phone. And it's like I'll think about like almost like a 50 meter and 100 meter targets. Like, okay, so here's what the players are going to be coming up soon with this session. Okay, so what is my end goal for that at the end of the session where I want them to be? So luckily for me, our sessions always fall short of targets, so there's always content that is prepared. It just happens to be like that. Not always, but just happened to be. So I just take little tidbits. I don't do any massive pages of explanations. I'd make my map once before the campaign started, and I'll like add little tidbits as the story goes on. So it's preparing for a session is not nearly as bad as starting a campaign, but
yeah, and that seems to be the going trend as far as what I'm concerned. Like, you prep so much ahead of time with what the players could possibly do, and then it always unfurls in such a way that your players kind of have their own ideas and they can deviate from those things and kind of cause their own little adventure to unfold in the midst of what you've got planned for them, which is great because there's always that other content sitting in the background, and you can always pull it back or try to corral them back in to pull that out of the hat, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. You can't really lay a railroad track with that. I mean,
yeah,
if
exactly.
anyone that's gotten a group of players, man, they'll deviate that left and right just knowing that there's a railroad. So that is true. Got to be a little bit flexible with that. And thankfully, little milestones allows you to kind of adjust them accordingly as things go on. So. And
I used to do this really long form thing where I would write out story hooks and plots and write pages and pages and pages in Google Docs, only to find out that really you just need some basic premises as to what the players are going to encounter. Kind of, I know I'm beating a dead horse here about setting up dominoes. Whatever they tend to land on, kind of roll with that, or at least have something in mind as to kind of direct them in that direction.
Right, and just kind of hoping that that's the direction things go.
Right, exactly.
You could get pretty crafty with some stuff. Like a lot of players can't see like the behind the scenes. Well, crap, they were supposed to go down this particular street and encounter this person. Well, it's like, well, they're in an entirely different new area, so we could take that street, and they don't know that it existed there, and plop it in the next town that they're in.
Exactly.
So you're able to shift the world around them as need be, if it you want them to stay on that narrative.
Right. And did you start by doing like the traditional, everyone around the table, and then eventually, I'm sure around COVID and stuff, switch over to the VTT, or do you kind of still do a mixture of both whenever it's possible?
The unfortunate COVID incidents with D&D. Yeah. I started with my original friend groups that we talked about earlier, with Around the Table. It's, in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to play. With COVID and everything that happened to that traditional group, I am kind of a stubborn individual. I didn't want to let my campaign die. After, especially spending so much time building it.
For sure.
So I opted to move everyone virtually. A lot of people didn't know how that would work. And
myself
essentially, it's a journey.
Yeah.
Thankfully, my father, who also plays D&D a lot and stuff too, he has his what I call the old man group. He calls that too. So they play virtually because they span in different states. So they use Roll20, and that's kind of where I got the idea to also use Roll20 and expand on it. So we would jump together on Discord, and then we would open up Roll20, and then whatever apps they were using, which now we all use D&D Beyond. It used to be just other third-party stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's how we played. It took people a little bit to get used to, I still run into the issues. It's harder to focus in when you're doing stuff digitally. Like it's just much easier to get distracted, and you're not going to be able to be there and involved and looking down at your chess pieces that are down on the table.
Yeah.
It's not the same setting, but with some of the materials they've came out recently, kind of allows you to come with more visual representation that kind of eases the burden of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my first VTT experience was in that session that our mutual friend Audrey was hosting, and just the trying to grasp everything, like how do I get logged in, how do I get my player on the board, and all these other moving parts that you're having to juggle. It can be really intimidating for someone relatively new to the interface as a whole. But you all were super helpful in helping me integrate myself into that world, and it was a little it was a little clunky for me. Typically where I play on a table and everything, and everyone's sitting around the table. I can place everything myself, and I know where everything's at because I can see it. But I eventually got to the point when, at some point during our session, where I could put myself in that space, and I really didn't think that it would happen as organically as it did, but it turned out really well, and I can see why more and more people are wanting to turn to this sort of format because it is just so convenient. Because just as well as I do, getting people scheduled to make the trip over, and then plus all the miniatures that you have to paint and set pieces that you have to craft, it can that alone can be a full-time job in itself. You can get done with your day at work or whatever, and then come home and spend the rest of your evening prepping for a session, not including what all you have to write, and you have to make note of the NPCs. But with something like Roll20 or any of the other formats like Foundry or something like that, it's all there.
Absolutely, yeah. And that it can be a little bit easier for the DM in a lot of ways, because if you're sitting at your home and computer environment, you got all your notes already listed out on there. Mm-hmm. You pull up all the web pages of all the different enemies or whatever, and then you have like your Roll20 centerpiece and whatever's DM guide you got pulled up. For a DM, I personally think it's a little bit easier when it comes to prepping. Doesn't require so much time. I'm not stressing out about, man, I didn't get to paint these miniatures and such, or this terrain. But as a player, it like you said, it definitely can be intimidating at a first go. I definitely, as a player, I kind of struggle a little bit to myself when I'm not the DM to stay ascertained into what is being presented. Yeah. But it could be a challenge. It's kind of like a bittersweet playing D&D virtually, but I love it enough to where I kind of buckle through and keep going with it. So.
And you all were really helpful as far as getting me going and everything on there. I'm like, I'm really not sure how to get this in here, and then you all, walked me through everything. And it was really good. And I think overall it was a really good experience, and I would really like to delve more into it.
Good, yes. Hey, I'm always down for any D&D option, man.
Hey, it might eventually come to that because some people, they just, life happens.
Right.
You get a couple of days out from a session, it's like, oh, I can't make it. But if they had the option to come in virtually, or if the session was hosted virtually, it makes things a little more accessible to people, I think.
True. My biggest struggle was always finding a place to physically play at. So that was always a struggle. But virtual kind of takes away, as long as you have internet access and a decent computer, you can kind of play anywhere.
Yeah, and with me, my group of players and stuff, we all live relatively close by. We all have corresponding schedules for the most part, but it's not that difficult to get everyone around the table. But I can imagine, like for instance, in your father's case, or in your case if you're traveling abroad, to have a virtual space where you all can come in and join, you create everything, and everyone, it still feels like you're all sitting around the table and enjoying an experience.
Definitely. Yeah. You can still share the same laughs and still get to put together that experience.
Yeah, it's all about having fun. So what's your favorite source material? I mean, I know you've touched on the Outer Realms, and Faerun, and the Wildmount. Do you prefer? Do you prefer like the pre-written stuff, or are you more of a homebrew person? Me personally, like you were talking about earlier, I like to take little bits and ideas from other source books and things like that, and kind of compile them into my own little space. Seems like I have a little bit more creative freedom when it comes to doing it that way.
Right. And honestly, after like I used to be 100% source book, and that was really dry for my character for my players. But
Yeah.
and then going into homebrew, I really do in homebrew. I enjoy the homebrew experience. The source books themselves, not only to the DM but to players, could be a little intimidating. So having that source is super convenient because you just pass around a book or pass around, a PDF version of it and be like, hey, this is like some generic backstory stuff. If you want to plop your guy down in one of these, it's super nice.
Yeah.
Well, when you're homebrewing, you don't get that luxury. You have to explain what the culture is. You have to explain kind of the different aspects and kingdoms and all the different terrain that kind of partakes within your homebrew. So that's why I always took from the sources, and when I deviate into homebrew territory, they could still fall back on those deities that they've always known and loved. They can still say that they originated from these places that they love and familiar with and come into a new journey. Or if they wanted to dive into that homebrew content, well, we'll just have to spend a little bit more time prepping.
Well, that brings me to my next thing. How important do you feel as though, like, a player having a backstory, how important is that whenever you're going about creating a world for them to interact in? For me, it seems like my players are more like they're just as happy sitting down and creating a character that they seem like they can enjoy, and not really put too much thought in as to where they came about. They're just happy to have that character in that space that I've created and have them interact within there. I guess it's different for everyone, but from my experience, that
Right.
just seems to be what my players are more interested in.
Right, that is actually a really good question. There's different styles of DMing, particularly ones that, let's see, ones, so like, let's see. So the different styles of DMing kind of coincide with allowing certain branches and then ones that are very specific with lore. So you have the ones that are like, here, just build your character. Let's go ahead and we'll just jump right into it. Here's a generic source book. I don't care about your backstory, and let's go ahead and run with it.
Yeah.
Well, the different styles of DMing, some more story based. Some people, like, they're there to create a story, and the other ones are there to create the experience and just have fun at the same time. Both, I mean, a lot of the sames, they kind of match. So it's not so much a huge difference, but I know a lot more DMs that, like, their strive is to have good combat encounters and actually have, like, strategic, like, ones that make the players think more about their encounter, almost like a board game, board game aspect of it. And the ones that are more story leaning. Myself personally, as we said before, that I'm super into these stories and such, I am one that really likes to drive a narrative, and I want my players to feel like they are stepping through these lands and being able to kind of have a foresight of things around you and they want to carry their characters forward into the narrative. So when it comes to backstories, I actually, and a lot of my friends kind of picked up on it as well, we require a little bit more in depth. If a player is not comfortable with putting time or having a big of a backstory, no problem. Usually what we'll do is what a little information they give me, I as a DM can kind of help them out a bit, kind of give them a little backstory and plop them into something maybe that might be simpler or an area within that what I'm navigating in.
Yeah.
But I would say the more backstory that people give me, the easier it is to take that content and mesh it into my campaign. And thanks to Matt Mercer with the whole idea of having story arc, our character arcs, it's easier to do that with a more lengthy backstory. Yeah. So I always encourage my players, the more you give me, the more I'll be able to use and integrate. The less you give me, well, I can work with you and we can figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good way of putting it. Typically, how often do you all play whenever you sit down to have a session?
So how often are our sessions?
Well, how often are your sessions, and how long typically, or does it vary wildly?
Okay. So each session in particular, we actually play kind of short for my idea of a session. We play around like 3 to 4 hours. Not a whole lot of time to navigate a story. But at the very least, that's just what's convenient and works with work schedules, which are scattered all throughout. Scheduling is ridiculously hard. So I try not to bombard them with a whole lot of time. I know they have other aspirations and stuff that they want to be able to do. So, how I used to play is like you would go over your physical ones, and it would go for like 5, 6. Yeah, there was even a 7-hour time that we would go through, and we would play. So it really depends on your audience, I guess. But yeah, we definitely have a shorter session rate, 3 to 4 hour sessions.
Yeah.
And how often do we play is probably about 2 to 3 weeks in between. We try to do weekly. We always try to do weekly, but a lot of times it doesn't work out that way. We end up having to skip a week just because scheduling conflicts, so it ends up turning to be every 2 or 3 weeks.
And when you're playing that often, do you feel as though your players are more involved in the story and are really wanting to add to it and kind of develop their characters along the way?
Absolutely. They the more often they play, the less they have to try to be like, oh man, we haven't played in months. So what the hell happened? You know?
Yeah, right.
And so whenever we play more often, they're more in tune to what's kind of going on. And to me, I feel like they're going to be a much more interactive. So I know DMs out there are like, they do these big mega sessions that happen maybe once or twice a year. That's definitely something you can do. Just hope players take notes.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's not too bad.
Yeah. After because ours was pretty sporadic there, we would in my main homebrew campaign. We haven't had one of those since March, and I used to, after every game, I would sit down and write out what all happened during that session, even down to like key bits of dialogue to kind of spread around. But that's incredibly taxing. It's really hard to keep that up, especially if you're trying to juggle everything else in life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to like note taking and stuff, do you? I've had people suggest note cards. I've had people, just do like a little pen and paper, a little notepad or something like that. What's your go-to as far as taking notes and things?
Oh, note taking.
Yep.
I am. It's actually quite funny. I'm a procrastinator at heart, and that kind of deviates into things, college and everything.
Yep.
Like I always love taking notes at college or handwriting notes, but when I sit down at the game, I'm like, I'll remember it.
Yeah.
A lot of times I don't.
Right.
But as a DM, that you run into those complications where it's like, shoot, what did I do last session?
Yeah.
So as a player, I take no notes. I know that's crazy. Like I try at first, and then usually just falls out. I just stop taking notes. So that's crazy as someone that DMs as often as I do, as a player, to not take notes. But as a DM, like I previously said, it's a little tidbits. It's whatever I'm thinking on the fly. If I come up with that 50, 100 meter mark of this is what I want, and here's like a few specifics to kind of help my brain start going, and I start going on a roll. I'm a very, what do you call it? Improv DM.
Yeah.
So based off those tidbits, as long as I'm meeting my goals, and then whatever comes to my chaotic mind at the time.
Right.
So.
And I think a lot of it, if
yeah.
you can, the more organic that you can keep it, the better, in my opinion, that the experience is. Like, you don't want to be sitting there reading lines and lines and lines of pre-prepared dialogue to your players, unless you're building up to like an important moment in the story. But you don't want to necessarily sit there every session and just dole out lines and lines and lines of dictation.
True.
And expect people to be interested.
That's in my personal experience, that's how source books kind of became intimidating to me, because all the way, every step or every milestone in these source book, or the DM source books, I should clarify, campaign books, they would have like, here roll for a random encounter here, okay, they go here's a few, like a crap ton of options of what they have, and then roll for encounters and experiences like that completely disheartened me. I'm like, okay, so what's the story, and we're gonna run this what seems natural.
Yeah, same. And it really is like, for me, I'm running Curse of Strahd and adding in a little bit of Ravenloft as I go along. But
nice, good one.
Yeah, it's really good, but it can be incredibly brutal if you read it verbatim. So like the random encounter tables and everything that's going on, like you can easily overwhelm your characters and yourself by planning all this out and, having to flip between the pages, finding exactly, well, they're going to do this thing right now. So flip over here and try to flesh all this out the best you can before they start going down that, that way. However, I feel like in a more organic setting or something that comes natural to you, it kind of makes that easier. Like there's a back and forth that happens between players and a DM that feels, for lack of a better word, it just feels better to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. More natural, more organic. And
Yeah.
to add on that, I want to, not everything comes off the top of my head. I must point out there, for the sake of my integrity, that there are things that I see along my travels, whether that be on Reddit or Critical Role or DM stuff, and I'm like, man, that's actually awesome. Like, I should be doing something like that I think my players would freaking love.
Yeah.
So I'll have like my own personal Discord server. I don't know, my brain's weird with organization, that I have that only I can see. Maybe another DM or something that I know, but I will put stuff I find, copy, snippet, and throw it in there. And if I'm ever like at a scenario where my players are looting this dungeon and I'm like, man, they haven't gotten any like cool loot anytime, I'll pull that up real quick and I'll be like, oh, here's a cool unique dagger that fits their level, and we'll throw it in there. So it has all the stats and everything with you. So
for me, for the longest time, I would use like the loot generator tools and stuff like that. It's like, oh, you got some gold and this random ass potion. It's like, oh.
6 rusted swords.
Exactly. It's like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? It's like, stab stuff with it. It's like, oh, okay, that's not very compelling. But I obviously understand that you don't necessarily want to, especially in like early campaigns, your players like 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 even, you don't necessarily want to hand them like something out of like a epic loot table or something like that, because then they're just gonna soar on through it all and just start waylaying everything that comes their way. And that can ruin the experience as well. Like, you want to try to balance your encounters and your social encounters in such a way that there's always that little bit of pressure there that they could feel like, it's like, if I don't do this right, then this could go very bad very fast. And so they're kind of playing off what you're going to do, and then you can kind of feel out as to what their personal strengths and weaknesses are, and it just, everything just works together.
Unfortunately, that is something that a lot of new DMs have to get the feel for. That's like something that only experience you could tell. Be like, man, how like, it goes in the mechanics. How powerful is this item?
Yeah.
How powerful is granting this ability to a new group of players? And even the most experienced DMs struggled to try to find that range. I always refer back to Matt Mercer, like giving a lower level party with like a magic carpet, like right, like, okay, so you're supposed to walk into this next town, but now they're flying continents away, and man, what have I done? So
I'll remember, like, I don't know if, I'm sure you probably have, their first season, Vox Machina. I absolutely loved that, and they used the absolute crap out of that magic carpet to do everything with it.
I think at some point Matt was like, man, I got to get rid of this thing.
Exactly. Yeah, like the Durgar camp, spoilers everyone, and the Mind Flayer and everything. They just really, really, really utilized it in such a way that they didn't really have to, like, they always had a getaway plan.
Absolutely, and they got real creative with it too.
They did, they really did.
Completely astonished the DM. I had no idea what to expect.
And I love watching those videos where it's like when the players ruin the CR-17 monster that the DM has playing, you just see the look on Matt's face. It's just like, did not want this to happen. But there they are.
Hey man, every DM eventually experiences something like that.
That's true.
So
that's true.
I know I've had a big bad just completely annihilated, and I'm just like, man, I should have put something in there. So
now, what's something that you've always wanted to use but you never quite had the opportunity to bring it to the table?
Something I've wanted to use, never got the opportunity. There's a lot of different creatures I absolutely love. Like, believe it or not, out of all my years of playing D&D, not once have my players ever encountered something like a beholder. One of those classic monsters that came to the that just fill the lore since first edition. Something like that I've always wanted to. But again, where I'm so narrative driven, it's hard for me to just kind of throw something in there. And I've only recently they've gotten to fight their second dragon within the past like 4 or 5 years. So there's a few things. I've tried to take a lot of time into becoming more tactful with how combat and stuff goes too. So I always try to think of not throwing more minions in there is not always the best route.
Yeah.
So I try to get creative, and I look up like all these different puzzles. Like, hey, you can't just you could go and wail on the big bad, but it's going to cause some more issues. So you got to figure out, some doohickeys around the room. Again, Mercer does a really good job of that.
He really does. And that's one of the things that I really don't take into much account either, aside from having minions and, general bads to assist the big bad. But, like environmental stuff, I think is such a cool concept to kind of play around with. Like one of the other people who I've interviewed here in the past, they suggested like environmental hazards, like whenever a black dragon breathes their acid spray. Well, obviously, the players don't necessarily want to kind of trek through that,
Right.
But kind of as they're involving themselves with the world, it too is changing at the same time. They have all these new things to deal with. I think instead of just having like, here's a dragon, here are you, how are you going to get it to the ground, and how are you going to fight it? Don't want every encounter to be like Skyrim, whenever the one thing that you have to do to win the encounter. You want to build a compelling story and narrative to kind of associate all that and have them formulate a plan as to how they're going to interact in that encounter.
Absolutely. And players, I've seen way too many times, players just kind of get bored with the whole hack and slash. Some people love it. Some people do love it.
Right.
But, it to put in some creativity and give them that opportunity to think outside the box. I know the first time I implemented puzzles with my players, they were like mind blown. Like, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to solve these riddles without looking them up. And I'm like, okay, all right, I got to tone it back a tad.
Yeah. Well, my players, they're the same way. Like, they love puzzles and they love traps and stuff like that. But if I bring a puzzle to the table, I will have spent weeks formulating these certain runes and how everything aligns and how they have to get get the door to open, and they're like, oh, we're going to do this, this, and this. It's like, did you see my notes or something? It's completely like, I'll have something planned. It's like, well, it'll take them an hour to get through this. 5 minutes later, and it's like, well, what's next? It's like, okay.
Oh, they could just dimension door through it. Man, I didn't think of that.
I'm equally bad for not reading what my players' spells and abilities are. Like, I can have I can have an encounter plan. It's like, well, they're going to encounter this succubus, and then they're just going to, they're going to try to make a deal with her. It's like how I envision everything going. No, he uses command, and, just ruins the entire thing. It's like, well, because, just as well as I do, the dice always tell the best story. And the dice will get you more often than not as far as, like, what you had planned and what will actually happen.
It's almost like Wizard of the Coast wants us to lose every time.
I know. And then, I haven't actually had a TPK yet. And that's one of the things that's always in the back of my mind. Is it okay to kill a player that has spent an absorbent amount of time in that campaign and creating, developing their character in such a way? How do you feel about character death and stuff in a campaign?
Ooh, character death, That's a very good instance, and comes up in a lot of DM's journeys a lot too. So before we get to TPK, a character's death alone, I really like to make it very, if I can, sometimes not always, but very organic in a lot of ways. So I've broken players' hearts. I felt really bad. I'm also, this is terrible. Everyone out there that can hear me, I'm sure you hate me for it. I do pull back a little bit, especially when we're like years into a campaign. I feel really bad about killing a player. I have done that before, but as far as a player death, it means sometimes it happens, and a lot of times the DM's not expecting a player death to happen, So maybe they just misread the player's capabilities, or didn't expect a player to just roll so badly, because on average, there's a lot of bad rolls. It can turn sour pretty quick.
Right.
So, but as far as I know, death happens rarely in my campaigns. It does. But it happens often enough where they're like, "Are you trying to kill me?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I mean, I'm just running the story."
I don't know how that gelatinous cube got dropped on your head. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Just roll with it. Just roll with it. It's fine. Oh, okay. This is cool.
I don't actively try to kill my players per se, but I definitely like that challenge.
Yeah.
And sometimes that challenge could be a little much for them, just depending. So, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
When it goes into TPK, I have never had a TPK happen. I've had one, well, in the very early stages of my DMing, when I first took up the torch from my players that were just always getting bored of it, probably about 2 years in with those guys, I had a narrative-driven TPK where, long story short, a demigod was kind of released by a group of cultists, and the players got there too late, and the demigod kind of was obviously too strong for these level, I think they were around 4 or 5 to deal with. They just, it was just meant to happen. Mm-hmm. And you should have seen all the looks on their faces. They were so sad. They were mad faces across the board. And some of them kind of picked it up. It's like, okay, maybe this is scripted. So the demigod kind of resurrected the group and in a much more narrative way, tell him, try harder next time, and kind of went on his way.
Yeah.
So that became the new BBG. So
I really like that too, and I've seen some people suggest too that if you do experience TPK, have the party wake up in like the Shadowfell, and they're on this.
Now that is a whole other can of worms that is really fun to go into.
Not only does it give you an opportunity to build another space for them to interact in, but it can also be like some form of redemption, or maybe give their characters another arc or something else to pursue. But it's not something that I don't know if my characters would receive it well, especially if I was outright kill them, and especially if I threw something at them. Well, I'll put it to you this way: I've thrown things at my characters that I've intended to be an incredibly intense social interaction, and they're like, "Fuck it. We're going to fight this thing." It's like, let's go right now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, exactly. I've always asked this in typical Mercer fashion.
Oh.
Are you sure you want to stab said dragon in the ass? Yes. Completely blank expression, but here we go.
Soul style real quick there. Yeah. I do have to point out, and for a lot of DMs, this actually might be a very unique way. One of my players, she's been there since almost the beginning. Her name is Izzy, and she's a brand new DM, and she came up with this wonderful idea that she's an art major, so she's got all that creativity mumble jumbo in there. But she came up with this idea of an entire campaign set in an afterlife. So she kind of did some research into a lot of history with like Greek gods and Roman gods and Egyptian gods, that like what the afterlife would look like, and kind of collided their ideas together. And really what it is players that have died in the past are stepping into this new world where they're kind of led into this afterlife motion. And then there's like an underlying goal to kind of help out this new world that they're in, or whether that be help or hinder it, or take down the gods, or destroy the system, however you want to do that. Yeah. She created this freaking awesome idea to be able to have that opportunity. So any DM that does end up getting that TPK, that is always an option, and maybe they can come be born again through that little short if you made it like a little campaign short or something.
That's an awesome concept. I really like that.
I was pretty taken aback. Been doing it for years. I never thought anything about like an afterlife campaign, so it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, how long have you been playing? If you just had to throw a number out there.
Let's see, probably.
And it doesn't have to be like a consistent number or anything. Just from point A to now.
The friend groups jump kind of make it a little confusing because I would do so many years with one and then so many years with another. Probably, if I had to just throw a number out there, 13 to 14 years.
It's pretty good.
Just playing D&D. That's not DMing, but that's just or that's just playing D&D. Yeah. Starting out with Pathfinder 3.5E. Or not E, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've always been curious about Pathfinder, and I've always heard that it gives a little more freedom as far as like your character creation and stuff like that. Would you
In my
mind to expand
opinion,
on that?
yeah, in my opinion, man, a little too much freedom for at least 3.5 is concerned. I ran into a lot of issues that. The cool thing about Pathfinder at the time when we started playing it is all the third party or all the people that kind of came together, which is good in a lot of ways, had created this expanded universe in Pathfinder for 3.5. And so as a DM, it got tricky because a lot of stuff mechanically were really strong for players, and it just was hard to be able to grasp. Like, I remember I would sit there for hours trying to read into like the basic mechanics for Pathfinder, only for to finally come to the table and there would be some out the wall wazoo stuff that my players bring because they ran down one of those rabbit holes and brought something to the table.
Yeah.
But the new Pathfinder I heard is a lot better. It's a lot more balanced. It's maybe that's just because it has a lot of people haven't had their hands on it yet, but Pathfinder created a lot of opportunities. There was anything you can think of out there where for 5e is a lot more limited, but a lot more balanced. So I love 5e to death. It gives more narrative-driven reins to the DM than just straight mechanics and math like Pathfinder or the first Pathfinder was. Pathfinder 2 I heard is a pretty good mix of the two. I've never tried it personally, but
yeah, and that's what I've heard about Pathfinder 2. It's more of like you drop your characters in like an arena setting, and they just kind of have this box that they can play in. It doesn't really offer too much as far as like a narrative.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of mechanics, a lot of math, that kind of logistics that kind of go behind it, which is a struggle for me as a history major. So
Same. Like math and rolling the dice is hard enough for me. I'm not even going to attempt to try anything further than that.
Right.
So I guess one question here that really I find myself struggling with is role playing. How do you go about creating these NPCs and characters that you develop and are passionate about? How do you go about bringing them to life?
Role playing. You've probably asked one of my favorite questions of all time. It is my cornerstone. Role playing is. That's what drives the narrative, and that's how the characters drive the narrative, or the players drive the narrative. Is all that role playing experience. So, from a DM perspective, I learned pretty quickly that for role-playing NPCs and such, you really got to drive a uniqueness to NPCs that are more important. So, give them that personality twist or something, or that itch that they just can't seem to get away, and the players will pick up on that and they'll kind of roll with it. But when it comes to the players with role-playing, I've had ones that are super into it, ones that are super quiet. So it's all about trying to there's kind of like a crossfire thing where the DM will always prompt for more roleplay for the quiet ones, and the really over roleplay guys will also help to try to get the more quiet ones to happen too. So I allow, essentially, as a rules perspective of roleplay, mine are nearly unlimited, as long as at the end of the day we can continue in a certain direction. So when I first began DMing, since roleplay was still my cornerstone, then I ran into arguments and conflicts and fights in between the parties, and that is rough as a DM. It is very hard to deal with.
I can imagine trying to separate all that. Like, are your characters fighting, or are you really pissed off at
it got
to over here?
They were calling each other like names. It was bad. It was bad. I eventually learned pretty quickly that alignments do matter to a degree. Okay. They do matter to keep that counter off. That I'm just playing my character this way, and I'm like, well, you're conflicting with everyone else. So, but
it's like your character's an asshole. I didn't want to tell you, but. There we go.
Right. You can play an asshole, but you're going to suffer the consequences.
Exactly.
If it disrupts too much, then man, you're going to have to change it up. So, yeah, absolutely. So, but role playing absolutely is what I encourage. I am more of a role player with combat kind of sparsed out, sprinkled on throughout the adventures. That kind of gives both players that have that drive. Like my father's a super combat placed. He still does some pretty good role play, but he's. But yeah, role play is our cornerstone, and that's what drive our stories, and that's how we get those those players to get a better connection and feel closer with that character, and that then they're super scared for it to die because they have all this attachment, and so it creates a lot of positive atmosphere around the table rather than I'll just make my 30-second character that just died again, just kind of going for the combatant part of it and not so much the role playing aspect.
And I've had players completely satisfied with just throw me in a dungeon. Here's a character that I want to see. I just want to watch them smash face, and whatever happens, happens. That's fine. That's true.
I've had those too.
As long as they're enjoying the experience, that's okay. However, whenever I have two people doing like a back and forth thing, I'm going to sit there and let them have that out. If it's a social encounter, especially because it can lead to some pretty good laughs.
Right, definitely.
Shop owner encounters, or like a town square, or like a meeting with a royalty, or like a duke or something of the area, or even just passing someone on the road. Just watching them interact with that can bring so many unexpected, but oftentimes fun experiences.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
So you brought up atmosphere with role playing. What other kind of elements do you bring into your space as far as music? Say you are playing. Excuse me. I got a little bit of bourbon stuck in my throat.
You good?
As far as like if you are playing, at a table, what kind of elements, like lighting, effects, or anything like that, do you utilize any of that stuff? I know, like last time we played in a VTT, like we had music and stuff like that. But
yeah. So atmosphere is one of those things that. So it is worth a note that as far as I get to play physically nowadays, that's kind of rare. Atmosphere is one of those things that I really want to dive more into. Of course, you can't beat Matt Mercer's setup. You just don't have the funds or the resources to do something like that. You can just bring out your little Bluetooth speaker and play a little music, and to kind of get people drawn into the idea of it. But I haven't had any cool lighting ideas necessarily yet. Music is probably one of the major things, or I'll set like if it's a rainy day, we start off our session with that. I'll put on some rain background noise to set the scene.
And I think that helps people get more immersed in it as well. Like say you're in a bustling tavern, you got some ambient shouts and everything in the background, kind of helps people ignore what's going on around them and immerse their characters and themselves in the particular setting. I think music and atmosphere is one of the most important things that you can do in D&D. But I've had some pretty compelling sessions where I was a player that we really didn't have any of that, but the DM that I was playing with was so good at telling a story and get me to place myself in that space that I kind of didn't really think about it too much. I guess you can have just an adequate amount of atmosphere just by using if you're a skilled DM. I for one am not that good with descriptions, but if someone has taken the time to really set up a scene and give some description to it, that I think that's good as far as being able to put yourself there. But music or sounds or whatever's going on around them is also a plus to that as well.
It's funny you mentioned that. Descriptions are actually one of my biggest struggles. Out of all the books I've read, out of everything, I actually always forget to put a good description in when it comes to important events. And sometimes I do pretty good, sometimes not. I have players that have a really broad imagination, kind of like the person I mentioned earlier that's an art major. Easy for her. Easy enough as her. And I have some people who are more or not physical, but they need a visual representation. And the descriptions for them are more difficult because you have to be more specific and you have to describe the scene in more in depth for them to really start picking up on that.
Yeah.
So that is a struggle for me. Like I really want to dive into that atmosphere, get better into description. I've been doing this for years and I'm still struggling on that. There's something I definitely want to improve upon myself. Setting the setting can set up for a very player, what do you call it? More focused, more
player-driven experience.
Yeah, like a more interactive. They're going to be more involved in the session versus like, yeah, you're in a forest. Okay, so here you're on a road. Instead of describing like what that forest can look like, what the time of day is, the clouds and what animal interactions you have around you. So all this stuff comes to mind, but it's hard for me to be like, man, I got to get to this point and that point, and I forget to mention those things that could potentially have more involved experience. So good. It is funny that you do mention that.
Well, I have trouble with it, especially if we're having a combat session. Describing as to what the player's actions are whenever they try to make an attack or to move around, the stuff that's going on around them as they're doing their turn. It's like, well, you swing your sword in a wide arc and you miss the kobold by mere inches, and for me, it's if I'm either feeling it or I'm not. It's really hard. It depends on what kind of day I'm having. If I've been brought to that point and I'm prepared for it, it's one thing. But whenever my players take a social encounter or something that I wasn't planned for and have to throw them in a combat encounter, then everything changes.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And that when it comes to combat descriptions, man, most people, like I said, 3 to 4 hour sessions, you can't get a whole lot done. So combat, it could be very tedious to describe like a lot of the interactions instead of like how you want to do this. You got some time to do that, but for as far as like misses and hits, when you're working on a short time, it's hard for me to be able to go through those. So
and that's one of the people I interviewed before, Todd Putnam from D&D Creative Tabletop Designs. He has, of course, he's been doing it for a long time, but he would do such a great job like describing combat, and because he would have, I don't know if you've seen his stuff or anything on Facebook, but he creates these giant dioramas, and so the players, he doesn't have to necessarily focus about what's going on, where the players are at. They can kind of see what's on the table and kind of expand on that using their own imagination and stuff. But during combat and stuff, they're kind of not having to take back. I was like, well, where's the wall at? Or where's, am I backing myself into a corner or something like that? Because all that is kind of there, and they're kind of able to place themselves on a periphery to all that. Let's see. What's your favorite session that you've ever had? Do you have any memorable moments? Well, you probably have a few.
Favorite session, man. That's hard. That's like, what's your favorite movie or show?
Right. Yeah.
Favorite session. I'm a victim for dramatic scenes, man. I really am. Probably the big reveal, the 180 twist that I had was one of these characters I had created that was meant to be the BBG, but from behind the scenes. So, posing the imposter BBG for people to think it's them all along and just to be a puppeteer of who truly is, controlling it. And honestly, I've gotten a lot better with those scenes that are super memorable. But probably by far is the release of, and we were, one of the last times we had done a physical session was I got to bring him out, and that was, I had put a lot of time and effort into this guy. I had contacted a Polish creator. I think it was something Imagination. So they were able to take a picture and create it into a miniature that is drawn. So you can work with one of their people, and you can come up with something that's super cool with that group. But I had got to put that expensive figurine down on the table, and the first time I got to do that, and they were like, holy crap, that is awesome. Like, it's not just something you bought from the local D&D shop. I put a lot of time and effort into this guy's story, so that is probably my biggest memorable scene. Like, I use that picture that I originally used for everything, and he's really what drives my current stories today. He's still alive. They never got him yet, so but yeah, that was probably the best one.
It's, for me, I struggle with this so bad, and I know my players hate me for it, but I want to tell them what I have planned so often. It's I've got all this planned, and especially if you spend time building an account, it's like, you better not look at what I just sent you in Messenger. Don't open that up unless you want spoilers. And they're like, of course I want to look at it, But when I'm trying to build something as far as a memorable session for them, I will try to create these set pieces, or I'll go on Hero Forge and create a big bad, or I will find a creator on Etsy or My Mini Factory, or one of those other sites, to bring forth something really unique, similar to what you were talking about, but like really take the time to get the fine details out, flesh them out as far as the story, what their motivations are, and everything. But I always wanted to use an ancient black dragon, and I threw it out.
Yes.
I threw it at my party of level 7 characters, and they destroyed it because I didn't know how to run the dragon. I was just so excited to use it. I was like, yay, I finally get to do this thing. And I completely left out the lair actions. Completely, yeah. That would have definitely done them in, I think, if I'd done that. And it was a solo dragon. I didn't use any minions or anything like that. And the second that they managed to get that dragon on the ground, it was game over.
Getting the turn rotation, stun locks, and
I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed that I got to use it, but I was just so excited to get to use something like that, and to watch them. Whenever I set the miniature out on the table, it's like the general consensus was, well, we're gonna die.
I love that. I'm such a victim for that. Like, man, this is gonna suck. I love that little butterfly feeling. Like, here we go. I get to be the top of the hour for a while.
And go ahead. No, go ahead.
I wanted to give where credit is due. Den of Imagination is that group. I just wanted to point it out there. They did a lot for me. So.
I will have to check them out, especially if they can take a few of my ideas and convert them into a miniature. That's awesome. Is pricing relatively doable?
That would be the one caveat. They're in Poland, so I'm sure there's other places out there. I don't remember how I stumbled upon those guys. I think I did a lot of research. Reddit always seems to be a big resource for me, so I think that's where I found them at. So, but Den of Imagination, like they do a lot of Warhammer stuff too. So I love Warhammers. Like Warhammer, if done really good, will draw the attention at in detail is magnificent. So I kind of hit them up because I know they've done Warhammer stuff and the occasional D&D, and you determine the price of the quality. So you can set it, hey, I just want something simple, nothing a whole lot of crazy, or to anywhere they're sitting on a throne on a platform with bodies everywhere. You can go the scale of level, just a miniature to a whole freaking scene. So of course you're probably going to be paying a really good amount for the end one, but the price about the raise, I mean, it's in the hundreds, as any quality would be, but still
to be able to set something, have an idea in your mind, and to see that brought to fruition in front of you, physically in front of you on the table, it's like, I did that. Enjoy.
Get to see them mold it. They'll send you the progression stages and such. It was
that's so cool, man. I will definitely have to check that out. Yeah, but so Jeremy, thank you for being on here. I know you've got a busy schedule and everything. I thank you for taking time out of your day to sit down and have a conversation with me.
Absolutely.
Got to pick your brain a little bit, and thank you for your service, brother. Much
thank you, sir.
There. And you got anything going on? Do you got any projects or anything that you're working on that you want to talk about? Any campaigns?
I'm still driving that Grey Rift campaign. We're probably over the midpoint arc at this point. And I kind of divided it into 3 arcs. The first arc was basically that source book I talked about, Out of the Abyss, that took several years. They're almost done with the second arc, and then there's the final arc that my players don't know about yet. That is going to be it's going to be different than what they're used to. I love Hail Marys and I love dramatic scenes,
there
so they better buckle up.
Well, I wish nothing but the best for you in your future endeavors, brother. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.